Module 3 looks at the steps that you need to set yourself up for success prior to actually starting any kind of mate cell run. And I cannot stress that this is such an important step. It's really, really important that you have a good understanding of all of the things that you need to set mate cell up, and as well as your breeding objective to then figure out what outcome is going to be the best for you and your breeding program. So we need to think about a few things when we're thinking about setting up for success prior to actually running MateCell, because we want ultimately our businesses to be more productive and profitable. So we need to set this up perfectly before we get started with MateCell. So first up, you need to define what actually drives your on-farm profit and productivity, both for your own business but also for your commercial RAM buying clients. You then need to identify how you're currently performing and then use that to set a breeding objective. So essentially a goal for a few years in the future where you'd like to be based on where you're currently performing. And then also that obviously then leads into using MateCell, which is selecting the right sheep for your business to help improve profit and productivity for yourself, but also for your clients. So the first thing is to define your production system and the production system that you're selling RAMs into, essentially, so your commercial clients' businesses. MateCell runs on an index, so we need to, I guess, align your particular breeding program to an index in your production system to an index. So if you don't know which particular index best aligns with your production system, I'd recommend jumping online on the Sheep Genetics website and having a review of the index documentation. So that's the first step. You then also need to identify the individual traits that drive profit. So think about those direct profit driving traits, whether that's growth, fleece quality and quantity, as well as any indirect profit driving traits. And they might be those visual type traits like, or health and welfare traits like WEC, breech cover, anything that's not necessarily a profit driving trait, but helps your uh, availability of time, helps breed easier to manage and care for sheep. You also need to think about the appropriate age stage. So whether you want essentially when your clients are ideally maintaining that particular trait. So if it's growth, for example, are they turning lambs off mum or are they letting them grow a little bit later? If they're turning lambs off mum as a terminal type lamb, then maybe a weaning weight is the more appropriate age stage. Otherwise, if they're letting them grow out a little bit longer, a post-weaning age stage might be the best. So you need to think about where your flock currently sits as well in the process of setting your breeding objective. So best to jump online and review your genetic trends. Look at all of the traits that drive profit for your business, both directly and indirectly. Talk to your commercial clients, see how happy they are or what they're currently achieving in the market for particular traits, and think about that when we're setting up our breeding objective. So a breeding objective can be very simple, and I would recommend that you write this down and keep it really handy next to the computer. You can also print out your genetic trends to see how you're performing for traits. So a breeding objective needs to be SMART. So it needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So you can overlay your genetic trends on this particular layout of a breeding objective. So we'd recommend ideally not putting too many traits in the breeding objective, so maybe start with 5, because the more traits you add in, the harder it is to make genetic gain across all of those traits. But think about the traits that drive profit directly and indirectly, how you're performing for those, and where you want to be in the future. So a breeding objective can be exceptionally simple. It can be as simple as the fact that you want to improve your post-weaning weight ASBVs because you want your lambs heavier by the time of sale. And you want to improve that P weight ASBV by 5 in 4 years' time. So I would definitely recommend writing it out because that way you can keep track of how you're going against your breeding objective over time as well. Another thing that's really important to have a look at before you're actually starting your mate cell run is your data quality. So jump online, have a look at whether you've got any exclusions that you need to fix up, any genomic pedigree inconsistencies, because mate cell obviously runs on looking at relationships between animals. So if there's lots of pedigree inconsistencies, you need to fix those up. Have a look at your data quality score and whether there's any simple things that you could fix. or exclusions before actually running MateCell as well. So before you start, make sure that all of your sheep have a full 16-digit ID. Make sure they've been submitted to the analysis. Ideally, you probably have a few traits recorded on those sheep before you actually want to look at joining from them as well. So it's really important that you identify all potential sheep that you might want to join from, not just the ones that you 100% will. So we need to think about using MateCell as selection. So put in any potential sheep that you might want to join from into MateCell and let MateCell help you figure out which sheep that you actually are going to join from. So also make sure that you're obviously classing in your sheep based on structural suitability, conformation and type. There's no point joining from something that can't eat, walk or reproduce. We need to also make sure that the potential sheep that you're inputting into MateCell align with your breeding objective. And also make sure that they have pedigree as much as possible, ideally, and make sure that they've got some trait measurements, like I said. You also need to think about the logistics of the matings that you might want to achieve. So think about obviously the number of ewes that you actually want to join, the number of rams you want to use, whether you're doing any kind of AI, ET programs, or if it's natural mating. And if you're using AI or ET, how many doses of semen per ram do you have available or access to? And then also thinking about the logistics. So have you got a few different joining groups? Are you joining younger ewes, older ewes? Are you joining across multiple different paddocks? Because that's obviously very important when we're thinking about the inputs that we're going to set for the MateCell run. And lastly, just a few helpful hints. I cannot stress that it's very important to start the process early. So especially if you haven't been using MateCell as regularly, or if you haven't been using MateCell at all, start the process early so you can refine the runs over time. You don't want to just put a whole heap of parameters in and just do one run. We would recommend doing multiple runs, at least, let's say 4 or 5 if you're new to the process, and input more emphasis on certain traits just to try and really nail down that ultimate or optimized progeny performance that MateCell will spit out. You also really want to make sure that you clearly name your runs and the data sets that you're using. There's nothing worse than doing a MateCell run and then not remembering which sheep you actually inputted into that, or you can't, or going away from the computer and coming back a few days later and trying to figure out what it was that you did in that particular run. Start with the basics and then build. So we always recommend starting with just a basic run using the index only, and then starting to overlay individual traits on top. Work logically. So again, thinking about setting up the logistics of your breeding program. If you need to do AI first, obviously that's going to be important. Or are you, using a ram in AI that you're then going to collect fresh on the day and then put out with a bunch of ewes to natural mate later, just thinking about the logistics essentially for your individual case. We want to have a look at all of the output files from all of the runs just to make sure that MateCell is doing the correct job essentially, and we'll talk through that a little bit later. It's really important as well to save the final result from that particular joining somewhere smart and handy on your computer, because if you want to in a year's time go back and see what parameters you put in, it's really important to make sure that that's accessible for you. And you also want to have a look at the effective progeny numbers as well. So there's not a lot of point going and doing an AI program and only getting 3 lambs on the ground or something like that. We want to make sure that the outputs that MateCell is suggesting is helpful for effective progeny numbers too.